Welcome to the Impact Multiplier CEO podcast. If you're a chief executive, or if you think like one, and you want to create exponentially greater impact, then this show is for you. My name is Richard Medcalf, founder of Xquadrant. I coach some of the most successful and impressive CEOs and executive teams on the planet and help them achieve extraordinary results. And no matter how successful you've been in the past, there's always a whole new level of impact available to you. So, if you're ready to play a bigger game than ever before, I invite you to join us and become an Impact Multiplier CEO. Today I speak with Michel Robert, who is the CEO of Epsilon Telecommunications. This is a global connectivity provider that's really simplifying how businesses connect applications and data in the cloud and around the world through its network as a service platform. We talk about the first few months and years in Michel's CEO role. Before joining Epsilon, he had an extensive career in tech and telecoms. He had many general management positions in companies such as Dimension Data and Claranet. And what we get into in this call today is the difference between the general manager role and the CEO role and what he learned in that transition. We also look at how he triangulates to find and isolate the very best ideas from all of the ideas that are generated within the business. He has a really great process for that, which I think you'll find fascinating. And we look at how organizational challenges that Michel went through actually helped improve customer centricity and how other businesses can use this as an advantage against some of their larger competitors. So this is a great conversation. Michel is a very thoughtful and interesting executive, and so I'm sure you'll find this insightful conversation with Michel Robert. Hi, Michel, and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Hi, Richard. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. It's always a pleasure to meet somebody who's binational. We were just talking about that before we started recording. I know you're French-American, and you've also had a really interesting career in the global world, right? But grew up in America, moved to Europe, and now you run Epsilon Telecommunications, which looks like it's a really innovative network as a service provider, helping simplify how businesses connect applications and data around the world. So I'm really looking forward to diving in to understand, over the last couple of years, as you took on the CEO mantle, what's that meant for you, right? And what's been that story? Perhaps we go any further, before we go any further, how about just giving you a little bit of the background of, how did you end up at Epsilon and in the CEO role?
Yeah. So, well, thanks again for having me on. So I joined Epsilon in February of 2020. So just as the pandemic hit, and as you mentioned, Epsilon is a global business with offices around the world. So it was a bit of a challenge to where I was expecting to be able to see lots of people face to face. Unfortunately, it's the total sum of my business travel has been one trip to Singapore. So very limited from that standpoint. I came to Epsilon after about working for 12 years at a company in the UK, headquartered in the UK, called Claranet, which was a great work experience for me. But as you mentioned, I came to the UK over 20 years ago after starting my career actually in the real estate business in New York.
Out of interest, what made you change continent? What was the story there?
I think it was, I worked for the same firm for about 10 years, straight out of university. So it was an opportunity to do something different. And because, as you mentioned at the start, I'm both French and American. I had the ability, then a French passport would give you access to work in Europe. And I got an opportunity to come to the UK. So I took that.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of my own background where I moved from the UK to France on a whim, thought it would last a year and ended up lasting over 20.
Yeah.
So fantastic. Yeah. So you were at Claranet, and then what was it about Epsilon that attracted you and got you interested?
Well, I think Epsilon, yeah, it's a really interesting business that, as you mentioned, is focused on providing some flexibility around what is an essential service to to businesses, which is a network connectivity that enables them to run their businesses and certainly adopt a lot of the new technologies, which are cloud-based technologies, where the networking component is critical to that journey. And so that was one of the things that, an alternative way of providing network services. My view was that, having worked with companies around application migration and around, how they take advantage of the cloud, what was clear is that the network that underpins those things wasn't quite as flexible as the services that were sitting on top, whether they be SaaS services or infrastructure as a service. And so there was a real, kind of gap. And Epsilon, and there's a few other companies, but Epsilon, I think, is a real opportunity to continue to grow in that space and provide that network infrastructure, that interconnection, end-to-end interconnection services that support that the future and the growth and the adoption of cloud.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Well, I know when I was at Cisco, we spent a lot of time thinking about that fact that this world where everything is so flexible on the software layer, and yet when actually people need to spin up their networks across multiple sites around the world, they've got to deal with a load of different providers. It can take months, I know, to establish connections at the right speed and security and so forth. And so it's always been a pain point for enterprises. So I can imagine there is a lot of growth right now in that area.
Yeah, and it is an interesting space. And Epsilon has successfully developed, well before I started, a platform called Infini, which is a software-defined networking platform, which helps in orchestrating and deploying those networks and doing it, really in minutes, as opposed to months and weeks. So yeah, it's interesting, really interesting space.
So interesting company. Obviously, CEO role is a coveted one. What was it, do you think, that that secured you that role? Right? What was it about perhaps your way of looking at the business or your background that perhaps made you the right person?
I think, certainly my experience on a number of fronts over the last, at Claranet and also previously there at Dimension Data. So it was really understanding how you look at a business, how you look to organize a business, grow a business that's customer centric, and really start with a customer and look at the segmentation of your customers to understand which customers serving today, which customers you'd like to serve, and how do you organize yourself and build a plan around that. So that's one of the things that certainly I have quite a bit of experience in. The other was at Claranet, I had the benefit of and the opportunity to be involved and lead many acquisitions in the business as well. So that's a very interesting process and really good experience to do, and certainly part of the plan at Epsilon. And we've had a recent change in shareholding in September. So that my experience in buying businesses really, I think, also helped me in help sell Epsilon as well. So I think it's a combination of general experience in the space. I have my original, when I started my career, it was in marketing, business development. I did some consulting as well. So I don't come from a pure technology background, and I think that general broad business experience is useful.
Yeah, it's interesting. Both of those aspects there, the customer centric and the acquisitions, obviously are well, they go nicely together, right? Because there's a sense of organic and inorganic growth in that. Tell me a bit about the customer centric business, because on one level you might say, well, everyone is every business needs to be customer centric. So what is it that you see that perhaps some business leaders might miss when they're thinking about their strategy or whatever? How does that, what are they not seeing?
I don't know. I can't comment on what they're not seeing, but what I think you really do have to make sure that you understand where your business is today and where if you're coming into an existing business, where is the revenue coming in today? What's working and what's not working? So what's the foundation? What do you want to keep? What do you want to grow? What do you want to yield? What do you want to maybe not pay less attention to? So I think unless you understand that, it's very easy, and I've made this mistake previously, it's very easy to get very excited about all sorts of new ideas when you don't fully understand the foundation on which you're either building or needing to change. So I think that first thing is it's almost a grounding, and it's to develop that understanding, and then from there, decide what you want to do. So in our case, we have three distinct customer groups: our carrier customers, which is where the businesses come from, the historic and still is a majority of the business today, but we have a desire to really continue to grow and serve that customer base while getting also diversifying a little bit. So it's an understanding of that. So you could get very excited about diversification, but forget where the majority of your customers are today. And that's the point I'm trying to make, is to make sure that you get that balance right between where you are today, what you need to do with that group consciously before you move on to something else.
Yeah, I'm with you. Perfect. Well, let's talk about this transition to CEO, because obviously I know you had general management roles, in previous steps in your career. As you look back over the last couple of years as being CEO, what do you kind of see as perhaps some of the step changes or some of the discontinuities in, from perhaps having a senior management role and being CEO?
I guess the transition for me has been, there's definitely been some significant learning, and I'll mention those. But I had the benefit where I worked previously, I had a great amount of autonomy as well. So as I was a managing director of and responsible for a number of things, I had a great amount of autonomy. So I felt that was very good training for me personally. Stepping into this business, so that grounding and that background I think was helpful. Dealing with one experience for me was dealing with a more formal board setup and more formal board of directors, very supportive. And that's now even, changed since our recent acquisition. So that's one thing, is the experience around that, whereas previously I was working in a less formal board setup. And the business is quite different in its global footprint. Previously, I was working predominantly in European businesses. So, and this has offices in Singapore, London, Sofia, satellite office in Hong Kong and New York. And so we have our teams are distributed across that, and our customers are also into Middle East, Africa, all over. So from that standpoint, that's been, a cultural awareness, the different working practices, time zones, all that stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? That's a great point, because a lot of general managers, you might become general manager of a country, even a region, and then probably the general management level above that, unless you're doing a business unit or something, is going to be suddenly CEO, and you have everything, and you have the whole globe as your purview. So what you talked about cultural issues and time zone issues. What do you think is what was the biggest learning that you had to go through when thinking about the global nature of the business? What changed in how you managed?
Well, I think communication, especially in the COVID period, and we're very focused on communication and sharing, what we're up to, our objectives, how we're doing, trying to get feedback from the teams. And I think it's understanding how various cultures and the teams in various locations digest communication, and what's the appropriate level of communication, and what do they, how do they feedback? How do they question? And as you would imagine, attitudes and I think the opportunity is always there, but the willingness for some people to question, not in a challenging way, which is always welcome, but also just generally to ask questions and understand what's going on and dig further. That each of the markets that we're serving and each of the customers, not the customers, the employees, it's quite different. So. And we've rolled out employee net promoters and other things to really engage. And I think you have to be sensitive and to kind of understand how people are going to digest information and how they're going to respond. So everyone talks about it, the importance of internal communication, and this is just to make you understand who's receiving that and how's the message going to land.
Yeah. So communication is always a big one. It makes me think about, as you were talking about that, around the kind of stories that might be underneath that. So, if you look back, is there like a top tip? So what have you done well? You just say, looking back, right? Well, what do you think you actually managed to do well in that difficult period, obviously with COVID and everything else, in terms of your own CEO playbook, if you like? What are some things you really focused on that you think has borne fruit? And then, is there something there where, looking back, there'd be a bit of a pitfall to avoid, or something which surprised you and perhaps took you off track for a little bit?
I think it's in a business that's changing and evolving, and is looking to reset not reset a strategy, refine a strategy, execute the plan. I think the temptation is always to try and do too much. So I think one thing that we were pretty successful on is not trying to do too much, and actually so many good ideas, so many bright people in the company putting forward lots of ideas. The trick is always to decide which are the ones to focus on. So we'd have no shortage of ideas, no shortage of brain power. It's, if anything, there was a need around, prioritization and actually focus. So I think that's, something that we did pretty well, but I could have done more of, be even more ruthless and really focus on fewer things, and communicate and continue to build and communicate on those things. That I think is probably a universal, lots of us, even in our personal life,
Yes.
So I think that's a very important thing. So that's been a big learning. So I think we've done it pretty well. I think we could do it better.
How do you do that? How do you filter all this groundswell of ideas from your very intelligent experts all around the world?
Yeah, I think you have to give yourself time to think. Well, first of all, you have to listen to make sure you actually really understand what they're talking about. And actually give yourself some time to think and continue to ask questions, and to really unfold where the value lies and why are we really doing this, and is this going to make a difference to our customers? Is this something that we think is a good idea? Or do they think it's a good idea? Does an analyst think it's a good idea? Does the customer think it's a good idea? So I think really making sure that myself and others, we really question and make sure that we feel really clear that this is going to make a difference. And that I think is a very important thing. But the first step into that is understanding. And I think the danger with all of us is that we think we know something and then we want to go and make a decision and move on and do something quickly. So I think, sometimes going a little bit slower at the beginning to make sure that you really pick the right things, and it helps you execute and move faster at the end.
It's Richard here with a quick interlude. As part of my coaching and advisory work, I often work with leaders who have recently taken on the CEO role. It's a big leap from the comfort zone of functional leadership or business unit management. And it opens up a whole new set of stakeholders, pressures, decisions, and responsibilities. I found that there are 3 key things that will make a huge difference in those first quarters. Number 1, balancing the operational and the strategic, what I call CEO focus. Number 2, establishing credibility, what I call CEO presence. And number 3, managing stakeholders, those CEO conversations. I've written a short email series that goes into more detail on the transition to CEO and how you can practically sharpen your CEO focus, solidify your CEO presence, and master your CEO conversations. It's insightful and it's entirely free of charge, and you can register for it by going to xquadrant.com/go/curve. Now, back to the conversation. I have a thing on my desk here. You probably can't see it, especially if, I don't know, I'll hold it up and I can't even see myself. It's a little snail. I have it there, a little snail on my desk, because one of the things I help my clients with so often, it's almost the first thing we have to address, because like me, and I help them because I have to help myself do this, is slowing down to speed up, right? A friend of mine went motor racing on a racetrack, in a sports car. And when they were training him, they said, look, first thing you have to do is you've got to go slow to go smooth, and you go smooth to go fast. And I think it's a great thing. Why do I have a snail on my desk? Because I think fast, I speak fast, and my clients are the same, right? They're ambitious, they've got big things, they're creative, they have lots of ideas, and they can be a bit of a hurry. But when we slow down our thinking, it just helps us focus in on what's that one conversation, that one move that we need to make that makes everything else irrelevant. And I think that you're totally right. This ability to give yourself time, you said, give yourself time to think. It's just so important. And when we don't do it, we end up in tunnel vision. And we can't see the thing that's just right here.
Yeah.
That's good.
And I think that's critical. And that's certainly one of the things that, I was just looking at my diary before this for the past week, and you just look at that and you think, oh, there wasn't a lot of thinking time in there.
Yeah.
So I think that discipline is another, it's really important, because time is the most valuable. It's really the only thing that we have.
Yeah.
To make sure that we can filter and help, allocate resources, which is basically the role, right?
Yeah. I mean, actually, in many ways, you could liken often what I end up doing with my clients as being, it's almost the equivalent of a personal trainer, because it's like personal trainer comes to your house, and like makes you do your exercises, right? Whereas if you've got to go to the gym, you might not bother going. And I think often when clients schedule sessions with me, it's almost like, well, now I know I've got an hour or whatever it is in the diary where I'm going to have to think.
Yeah.
And where perhaps I'm going to be able to take, I'm going to be able to take my thinking in a different direction from what I might do naturally. But I think whether you have something like that or not, it is trying to find out how do you actually make that time in the diary. What I find with people is often they'll put in something called strategic thinking time. They'll put a slot in their diary, and I always say that is like a recipe for procrastination normally, because you get to it and it's vague, it sounds hard, like it sounds like the stakes are high. I've got to think strategically about, and so it's much easier to just do your emails or work on the report you've got to deliver for the board. Whereas if you kind of really get specific about what's the problem I want to think about, and then label it as that, then it becomes a bit easier to go, oh yeah, I've got half an hour to come up with, 5 possible ways to solve the customer churn issue or whatever it is. Suddenly, then that creates a focus. The other thing I wanted to pick up on is your point around triangulation, right? You talked about triangulation around, who thinks this is a good idea? Is it the analysts? Is it customers? Is it us? Do we think it's a good idea? Do the team think it's a good idea? I think that point about getting multiple angles on a problem and kind of multiple validation points, I think also potentially helps slow down the thinking and make it better.
Absolutely. And I think in an industry which is, obviously moving quickly, lots of innovation, incredibly, technical partners that are developing all sorts of incredible stuff, and they want to talk about it and they want to get you to think about it and they want to get you to promote it. But invariably you're talking and thinking and promoting something that's not really going to be adopted for, 18 to, whatever period of time.
Yes.
And so, if you drink the Kool-Aid too early, you have to keep an eye on that, but that's probably not what's happening in the market today. And I think that's the balance. So certainly, we've, for all the teams, we've just made some recent changes around our product management function, as well as working with our solution design teams with technical pre-sales and so on, to really push them to be customer facing, and all of them to be taking meetings with customers, all of them to be engaging in support of our sales commercial organization, because just to make sure that we're focused on the right things. And I think it's very easy, especially in an industry, as I said, that's moving so quickly, that has so much going on, to get distracted. And so I think that's, it sounds like a very practical and obvious thing to do, but I think it's easy to get pulled off in different ways.
Yeah, so you're really getting everyone speaking to customers. It makes so much sense, right? Because it's the customer needs that are going to drive the business. And you're right, in technology, it's really easy to get excited about the next thing coming down the line. every vendor will tend to have a 5-step or a 3-phase vision of the future, right? They can probably deliver phase 1 today, and they're working on the other ones. But it's easy to kind of buy into something which is at this stage unproven. Sometimes that's what you've got to do, I guess, right? But it's an interesting question. I mean, I think what you're talking there is almost the difference between growth and scaling, as one of my previous guests put it. So scaling means like you've figured out what you're doing and you just need to do it more of it. Whereas growth is more growing into new areas or launching new products and services and that kind of thing, and doing new things. So again, how do you balance the two of those, right? How do you balance that, like doubling down on what today's customers want versus, for example, as you said, your carrier customer base, versus perhaps investing in things that might have a higher growth potential in the future? Because it's always been the telecoms dilemma, right? I mean, I know you're not a traditional telecoms company, but often it's always just been easier for telecoms companies in the main to say, we'll just put the price up by 1 cent or something, and that'll have much more impact than innovating on some tiny little service which isn't going to make a difference for 5 more years. But then, of course, we've seen what's happened, and a lot of the big carriers have kind of got to peak telecoms, got to peak revenues, and they didn't have the growth engines behind that. So how do you look at those challenges?
I think that's the question of innovation, and you're saying your point around growth versus and yielding. I think it's difficult, but you got to strike that balance. You really have to think about, realistic, what is it going to take to execute on a growth strategy as opposed to a yield strategy. And invariably you have to do both, because to your point, if you just do the yield strategy, then all of a sudden you're going to wake up and that's, there's not going to be much to yield anymore. And then the growth, you're going to be slower. So in terms of selecting what to focus on, again, it goes back to understanding what are the customers and what are the demands. And, there's a lot of information out there as to what's working, what's not working. That's a base to start. But it's really about getting the commercial teams to be linked into and feel empowered to actually have an influence on it. Not to say this is a list of stuff that you sell, just go sell it. It's actually to say, okay, so what's working, what's not working, where are you seeing traction, what's the feedback that you're getting, and to get everybody involved. And the advantage of being in a small business, relatively small business, is you can do that. When you're in a really large business, probably harder to do that. Because there's kind of a greater risk of silos. So that's what we're trying to actually make sure that we don't lose the advantage of being small and don't create kind of organizational structures and things that might make sense for bigger companies, but actually that's not really how we want to work. So the example that I just used around the product and solution design teams, which is really that, which is, we take a very traditional approach, which is something that we've had that we're trying to move away from, to make sure that those teams are, super engaged in facing the customer. Yeah,
they get the benefit right of the market access. Yeah.
And they also feel, I think one of the things that smaller businesses like Epsilon can provide is that sense of satisfaction, work satisfaction for people. One of the questions I always ask during the interview is, where have you had the most fun, and why? So from a job,
so where have you had the most satisfaction?
Most fun, most satisfaction, and why? And so, invariably it'll be where it wasn't necessarily financial. It was, I did this, I saw this idea, I recommended it, I was able to implement it, I made this change, we changed this process, we introduced this product, whatever. And I think that, certainly Epsilon can offer that type of environment, and we want to foster that type of environment. And that, I think, helps in the triangulation, your point previously. But it also helps, employees to feel they can really make a difference, because they do, know. And I always joke that if everyone's waiting for you to come up with the ideas, we're in big trouble, right? So it's got to come from, it's got to come from the team, and then I can help, assess those ideas and help decide if they're a good one, but not necessarily to be the one generating them.
Yeah, no, I love it. It's like you're expanding the organizational surface area, right, in contact with the real world, right, outside of the organization, which is important. When I was at Cisco, I mean, Cisco's a great company, but there were times when there were, this massive strategies which you felt were being developed, with very little touch points sometimes
Yeah.
with the outside world, and it was really important to kind of try to force that to happen, but it can be hard in a larger company, right? We have lots of people who are working on internal presentations and decks and all the rest of it, and managing the stakeholder environment. So I think an advantage of a small company is exactly that. So yeah, it's a great point. Let's kind of move to wrap up a little bit here. Michel, it's been a great conversation, and I think this whole question around focus and triangulation, and I love that interview question as well, right? About actually finding out where people have had fun, and using that as a way to help people connect with what is important in their role. Yeah, it's fantastic. So a few quick questions. What's a favorite quote of yours, like a leadership quote, perhaps, or something which has been a guiding principle for you?
I mean, it's the definition of insanity is doing the same thing but expecting a different result.
Nice.
That to me is, I think about that all the time, because I think about, if something's not working, but we're expecting a different result, you try and stand back and say, are we doing enough things differently? Are we trying different things? Are we doing, in your core, in your gut, do you feel like that's enough? Are we doing, are we changing enough to expect a different result? And if we're not, then we're kidding ourselves. So nice. That's my quote.
Perfect. Do you have an app or something on your phone that you really rely upon?
It's probably the music. It's probably music. So when I have my thinking time, and I don't put that slot in the diary. But if I have an afternoon, I just need a little, and then I just listen to some music, and it helps me.
Yeah, nice. Actually, that reminds me, there's an app I've used a little bit in the past called Brain FM, which just comes to mind, which is, it's not music, but it's like this neuro, based kind of sounds that are really quite interesting for kind of allowing you to focus or relax or whatever, right. Which I've used a little bit in similar circumstances.
I'll try to make me smarter. That'll be good. I need it. One. Thank you.
What about a book that's really influenced you as a leader?
Well, I think there's business books that I've read, and a very simple one, which I think is quite powerful, is Good to Great, which a lot of people have read. Yeah. And then on a personal level, and this I read a long time ago, but it's just such an amazing story, was The Grapes of Wrath. And in terms of really understanding, you talk about struggle, and you talk about the human spirit. So two different books. One, The Hedgehog Principle, and again, kind of
book,
keep it simple. Also the principle out of that book, which is great, is the right people on the bus, which is hire good people. You can figure out where to put them in an organization if you have that luxury, but people will make all the difference.
Absolutely. What advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Take more risks. Take more risks and be more confident in, always people talk about the fear of failure and all of that. I think that's definitely, you need to fail or take risks. Hopefully you don't fail, but take more risks.
Yeah. I think I like to help clients redefine failure. It's only failure when you stop, right? If you're keeping going, you're not really failing. Was it Churchill who said that success is launching, is like stumbling from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm, something like that, which I think is a helpful way of reframing what is failure and what is success. Last question is, who's an impactful CEO, who's perhaps made an impact on you, again, who might be a good guest for a future episode, and what do you admire about them?
I was thinking about, the CEO of the firm that I spent 12 years at, so previously at Claranet. A very, very clever guy, started a business from scratch, has grown the business, very successfully, and has been able to kind of balance that. What do we need to do today versus in the future? So very, very interesting guy, very thoughtful guy.
Yeah, it's when people build a business like that, it's always, there's always something, always a bit of magic somewhere right there.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So finally, no matter where we've got to, there's always a next level. So what's the next level for Epsilon as a business, and how do you feel that you're going to need to change personally as a leader to follow that growth and to lead that growth?
Well, for us, we've, as I mentioned before, we've just concluded a transaction. So we've brought in some 100% new shareholders into the business, and the main majority shareholder is KT, which is Korean Telecom. So a very large organization, a very, very strong player in the telecommunications business, obviously in Korea, but also in Asia. So for us, it's, we've been acquired specifically to help enable an international expansion and act as a platform for them to grow outside of Korea. They're domestically dominant there, but opportunity to grow. So, for us, that's a massive opportunity, and to have, the endorsement of a KT in terms of their investment and the financial investor with them. So as a CEO, I have to now be able to make sure that we take advantage of that opportunity. We'll be left as a standalone entity, but how do you strike the balance between being part of a larger corporate, another subsidiary for them, but and take advantage of that while we also maintain our independence and maintain our agility and all the things that we talked about, because really the value in the business. So that's, I think, the next challenge for me.
Yeah, so it's going to be, the stakeholder world has changed, right? And it creates a new dynamic. There's new things to think about.
Yeah.
So
so I think we're 2 months in. So 2 months in, so it's very fresh, and trying to, but great opportunity again. So something that's what I got to figure out.
Yeah, fantastic. And if people want to find out a bit more about Epsilon or about you, where should they go?
I think maybe the obvious places. So the website, Epsilon website, and then LinkedIn is I have a profile on LinkedIn. So those are probably the two sources.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, hey, Michel, it's been great speaking to you. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It sounds like you're at a pivotal point, another pivotal point in the growth of the company, right? With KT coming on board, with the whole market trends, I think, in your favor here, right? And so it'll be really fascinating to see what happens over the next couple of years. So thanks again for taking a few minutes with me.
Great. Thanks so much.
Okay, Michel, take care and speak soon. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Now let's talk about you. When you're in top leadership, when you're in the biggest role of your career, who supports you at a deep level as you lead others? Who helps you multiply your impact and get to the next level? If you're ready to learn more about our content, our coaching, and our community, then visit us at xquadrant.com.